Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and of course, this is my co-host.
I am Chris Huddleston.
And today we are both very excited to be talking to you about a brand new movie, a Shudder original film, Mad God. Do you have a synopsis for us, Mr. Huddleston?
I do. So this is directed by Phill Tippett, and we'll get into him as we go along. So the synopsis from Rotten Tomatoes says, follow the assassin through a forbidding world of tortured souls, decrepit bunkers, and wretched monstrosities forged from the most primordial horrors of the subconscious mind. Every set, creature, and effigy in this macabre masterpiece is handcrafted and painstakingly animated using traditional stop animation techniques. Mad God is a labor of love, a testament to the power of creative grit, and an homage to the timeless art of stop motion animation.
Well, I would agree with all of that.
Yeah. So tell us about it. Your thoughts.
Well, neither of us had seen it. It's brand new. Although he's been apparently working on it for a while.
I did a little bit of reading about it. He started on this. So I don't think he's directed a whole lot else. He's primarily a visual effects guy. He started out the original Star Wars and Jurassic Park and Temple of Doom, but he did effects for RoboCop 2 in 1990, and that's when he started working on this. And then when Jurassic Park came around, he decided that stop motion was dying, and he shelved it for 20 years and then came back to it. And he got a bunch of people to help him with it, help him to finish it. So
we do spoil these movies. So
I don't know if you could spoil this.
I don't know if you could spoil this movie, but we do talk about it in great detail. So if you want to watch it unspoiled, know that before listening to this podcast. So I will start with the synopsis and say that I agree. I think as a work of stop motion animation, it is, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I mean, it is so meticulously crafted that however you feel about the film, I think you have to take off your hat in appreciation of the work and the design and everything that has obviously gone into it. I mean, I think I'm going to split at the end my recommendations into two pieces, because there's a part of me that's like, if you're into stop motion and however you feel about the other content, it's worth watching just for that. It's a masterpiece in that regard. Otherwise, I think the movie, the tone of the movie is really sad. Like, I'm not going to say it was hard to watch, but I found I really was looking for any kind of hope in the film, and I really, you could interpret some little things. Maybe you could say, well, there's another way of looking at it, and I don't know. The gut feeling I had was just so bleak. What did you think?
Yeah, I think this is going to be one that our thoughts are going to be very similar. Down to when we get to the our recommendation at the end. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the craftsmanship, as you said, it's a masterpiece. Um, the tone of it, it's like watching a nightmare. And like you said, it's sad because it's all of these different creatures being killed and squished and tortured by other bigger, more powerful creatures or mad scientists or whatever. I kept thinking watching this. So Shudder bought this and they did a limited theatrical release with this with AMC, and it did about $325,000. I don't know what the budget was for it, but this would be a great movie to watch at a festival with other people, in a so I watched this by myself, and I imagine you probably did too, right?
Yeah.
But to watch this at some kind of a festival in a packed house with some beers or whatever, and like-minded people who are really into this kind of thing, I think that would be the perfect way to watch this. It feels kind of like you are watching like the greatest student film ever made. You know what I mean? And I don't say that to disparage it in any way, because it's
I know
so
what you
well
mean.
done.
Yeah.
But so you definitely, I think, can see how it's almost in segments. So most of it is stop. Kind of in the middle, there's a section where he gets captured, and this mad scientist or doctor or whatever, they're removing all these things from inside him, these jewelry and maps and things, and that's live action. It's not stop motion, and then there's other stuff later on that's stop motion, but this definitely feels like something that was created over a period of years. And I think anybody if you worked on something for 20 or 30 years, there would be ideas that would change or techniques that would change or whatever. So so it feels kind of disjointed with that. But towards the end, everything's dark and dreary and industrial, but there's a part towards the end where you're in the kind of this psychedelic world, and that's the only time where there's any real color in this, and it's refreshing, and you think like, oh, this is kind of a nice turn, and then one of the people gets eaten by a big spider. So
I know what you mean about the student film comment, and I think that's I just think that Phil Tippett directing is its own art form, and his mastery is in this other thing. I think it feels like someone's first movie from that angle, in terms of one thing of storytelling and flow and the management of tone. This doesn't feel preachy. I feel like there are messages in this. I think the messages were, at best, they're deliberately enigmatic and left open to interpretation, and at worst, they're supposed to be very clear, and they're not. So, I think looking at it from one way, it's the sort of like 2001. There's a lot of homage and reference to 2001: A Space Odyssey in this, and the end of that didn't spoon feed you any meaning. You're left to interpret the conclusion of that movie as you will. I think there's a way that you can look at this film and say the same thing, but there were other parts of it that felt like, oh, this is a trail of breadcrumbs, and oh, I think now that is supposed to be the like aha moment I have, but I'm still confused.
Yeah.
So I think I think that's an unseasoned director. I think tonally, like if you were going to make an album and every single track was a downer, then that album would be a downer.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Make your album. But there's a part of me like, how many people, right? I mean, you made it for yourself and it's a downer and you don't care what other people think, so be it. I think if you're making a film, part of the implicit thing is that people will watch this film. It's a visual medium. I mean, I just don't know that I could sit through this again. It's so depressing, and it's occasionally upsetting. But it is like watching a nightmare. I didn't think any of the stuff was so nightmarish that I couldn't watch it. It just we should back up a little. So at the beginning, it starts with what's pretty clearly a reference to the Tower of Babel, right? That's the Tower of Babel. And in the Old Testament, God destroys the Tower of Babel and scatters the people of the earth. And then we get a passage from Leviticus where God is saying, basically, if you don't honor me, I will mess you up. And it's from Leviticus, and obviously the Bible was not written in English, so the translation might be strange in the King James Bible or whatever that's pulled from, but it's the text of a wrathful God, right? And that's one interpretation of mad God, that God is mad. I think another one in this film is that God is insane. Like only a mad God would create these worlds in which we seem doomed to. He creates creatures that aspire to the heavens and that then inevitably piss him off and that he destroys. And what we see throughout the film is all these different living things. Some of them are little humanoid, some seem to be people, some are these sort of assassin characters that we never really see their face, but they have human eyes at least, and they're humanoid. And it's just kind of a post-apocalyptic kind of meat grinder.
Yeah.
Some of them are working in a big factory and they're just kind of whatever the production line is clearly more valuable than their existence because they're just getting kind of obliterated in the process of different things happening, and there's no value to their life. And in other cases, this sort of mad scientist character has these very colorful and pretty and happy little sea monkey type characters that he then unleashes this predatory spider creature on, and it takes the little one. And he delights in it. So at one end of the spectrum, there's just this cosmic indifference to life having any value, and at the other end of the spectrum, there is cruelty and delight in the carnage. And there's sort of a lot in between. There's two big dumb creatures that are basically shoveling shit. I mean, that's kind of what they're doing. They're fighting, and he electrocutes them to stop them. So they go back to work, and then they do for a little while, and then they start fighting again. And it's all these sort of reflections on what I feel like is supposed to be human nature. And it's all pretty. It's either nihilistic or pessimistic, or somewhere in between, or a combination of, I don't know. It's as spectacular and dark as it is. I mean, it's nightmarish, it's monstrous stuff, but I mean the animation is spectacular.
Oh yeah.
The vibe is just like
it's grim,
really grim. And then it gets bigger than that, because at the end there seems to be some sort of cosmic cycle where they're creating a new universe, and they send this obelisk out into space, a la 2001 again, and it seems to hit a barren world and create life. And we watch that come all the way up through all the way up through great cities that are then obliterated. And it sort of seems to be saying that, this cycle repeats ad infinitum and there's no other outcome. And you're just like, man,
Yeah.
30 years you spent like, man, oh man.
Yeah, you mentioned the word cruelty, and that's what I kept thinking watching this. There's just so much in it that just feels so cruel. There's one of the most upsetting things is pretty early on, where there's a scene where the assassin opens this door and there's this kind of monkey-like creature strapped to a table, and it's being tortured in some way, and it reaches out its hand, as if to say, like, help me, and he closes the door back up. That was upsetting.
Yeah. He's on a
Um,
mission, and he's on a mission with a briefcase, and it turns out there's a bomb in a briefcase. He gets all the way down to the bottom, which also made me think of like the 9 circles of hell or something. He gets all down at the bottom, and there are just mountains of these identical briefcases, and then there's some sort of spider creature that's been stalking him, that nabs him and drags him away, and the bomb goes all the way around to a minute and gets stuck at like 10 and 11, right? And so then it's just another one of these briefcases in the mountain of briefcases. And the character that I think is supposed to be in the credits, he's called the Last Man, is sort of the one that's sending these assassins down. If he's the last man, I don't know what the assassins are, if they're not men. There's a lot that's unanswered in this. Sends another one down, and that one goes on a sort of a different journey with a map, and that's, I don't know, it seems to make commentary on I thought, so is he like a leader, and are these witches making the map? Are they like the intelligence service, or am I trying to find meaning where there isn't meaning? I wanted some causal something, and it wasn't. It would go to another sequence in which something else horrible was happening.
Yeah. Another, to talk a little bit about the design a little bit more, all of the the beginning is this long sequence of the assassin lowering down in this sort of elevator like thing on a cable, just through, and I hadn't really thought of it, but you talked about the 9 circles of hell. It's just, he's going down and down and down through these different areas, and all of the set design in this, it's all just spectacular.
It's breathtaking.
I wonder what this would have cost. And just, I think, now this is kind of in my recommendation, but I think for people who, there would be a lot of people, just average moviegoers, that aren't going to understand the work that would go into something like this. But, people who are really into stop motion and know how, we played, and I think a lot of maybe people of our generation, we played around with that as kids, trying to do stop motion stuff, and it's, you'd have to have just unbelievable patience to create something like this.
And that's us moving, GI Joes around,
and Star Wars figures.
This guy designed and built all of this stuff himself, and it's just, I mean, just even the post-apocalyptic landscapes are, you could pause it, and just the background through which a character walks through in a 2 or 3 second shot are so crammed with remarkable detail. It's really something. And then there's a lot of, he's got a style that I think becomes clear. There's a lot of glistening goo and viscera, and there's a lot of kind of rolling eyeballs. And there's a sequence in which this sort of death figure that's wearing a kind of a plague mask and has a big black brimmed hat with lots of little streamers hanging down off the front is traveling. He's got this sort of, it's crying like a baby, but it's sort of a hairy worm that they've extracted from the body of the first assassin that is captured. And it goes on this long journey through I thought it was one of the most spectacular sequences, just the different regions this thing goes through and on its way to where the mad scientist is. Because there's such variety and there's such it's almost mystical. Like it made me think a little bit of the Multiverse of Madness sequence where they're falling through the different realities. She punches a hole and then then they're paint, now they're blocks, and now it's and then it's all kind of, it's like every scene is plus it's a break from the post-apocalyptic world that we see the assassin moving through seems to be either the surface, which is a ruined city, or there's a kind of a World War I landscape with big craters and tanks and war machines firing at each other. And there's a sewer and there's crazy stairs going down. And then there's other things that don't conform to reality. There's a giant square spiral going down that he's in sort of a Jeep, that he's kind of piloting the Jeep along this edge of it's not a staircase, but it's like this square ramp. Visually, I would say it's almost a must see if you're into this stuff.
Yeah.
But my mother mustn't see it.
Oh yeah.
Not my mother mustn't see this, but I don't think that my mom needs to see it. A, she's not into it, and B, it's really not her thing, If you like horror and you like we like the stop motion animation, you have to check this out. But is this something to sit down? I didn't enjoy it all that much. It made me feel bleak is the word that you used. It just made me feel really sad.
Yeah.
In my stomach, because I'm like, wow, there's no hope.
Yeah.
That I can find here. And so it's not really a date movie. I think you're right. I think if it was the kind of thing that you were at a festival and you were screening it with other, and then there could be a talk back afterwards where people could discuss some of this stuff, I think that would be, plus seeing it on a big screen, you'd really get to see the detail even more.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's not what I would call even an easy watch. I didn't fall asleep or anything, but
yeah, it's not, I was never bored with it. There's always something interesting to see, but and one thing that we haven't talked about, there's no dialogue in this really. Right. I mean, there's people mumbling and and
there's sort of baby sounds crying. They're all kind of upsetting. At best, it's like over a speaker, and at worst, it's just a audio track of a baby crying in distress, which I don't know about your nervous system, but it's like an ice pick in my nervous system.
Yeah.
Stressing a sound.
That's one of those, primal things that you are, wired to be upset by that. And I was going to say something and I lost my train of thought, but it's not like it's a fun watch. I mean, early on, I was like, wow, this is just so breathtaking and cool. This is going to be a fun thing to watch. But you get I had a hard time with the operation sequence. That goes on for a long time. And it's really, really gory. And, they're just pulling stuff out of him and these squishy sounds, and it goes on for a long time and it's gross.
It's not exactly a torture sequence, but it's real close. Because the patient is clearly still alive. The eye is rolling around and
yeah,
it's upsetting.
Now back to the comment that I made about feeling a bit like a student film. So I read some comments from him, And he said when he, 20 years later, when he decided to finish it, he had a lot of volunteers who helped him with it. And he said, and it's not apparent watching the film because it's, throughout it's skillfully done. But he said some of the people, it was like he was happy to have their help, but they weren't trained in this and didn't really know what they were doing. And, he was just sort of guiding them along. So, that's maybe that lends to the student film feel. I don't know, but and he had I forget who it was, but he had a sound designer who was a friend of his who helped him with it. And the sound design is really great. The music is really great in this. So it's all, it's just such a technical achievement, and this got quite a bit of attention. So I think it would be, if it's something that he wants it to do, I think it would be really cool if Shudder or Netflix or somebody like that would give him some money to do a stop motion film, maybe with, more of a narrative.
Something on the sunny side of the street, maybe.
I mean, it doesn't have to be in the sunny side of the street, but I remember what I was going to say. So some of there were some various things that this, like you said, homage to 2001, A Space Odyssey, but there are things about this that feel kind of like something Terry Gilliam would have done.
Yes.
There's some Lynch in here. I don't know if you've ever seen Eraserhead or not, but there's some Eraserhead kind of feel here. And even have you ever seen The City of Lost Children?
Yes.
Some of that. I don't know if those were influences on him or not, but it's, those are some other filmmakers that have done some very dark, bleak stuff like this.
Yes.
So I could definitely see this being a, really a cult film. I mean, this is a cult film kind of in every sense of the word, but, kind of growing to be appreciated more over time among, as you said, people who are really into this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it's really, even with those comparisons to other films and other filmmakers, it's still really unlike anything you've seen before.
I think that's true. And that's saying something. That's really quite a thing to say about a film. We talked about movies like The Gray Man, and we've talked about style over substance. And in The Gray Man, I just think there's no substance. It's a lot of style and there isn't any substance. And in this one, I think that the style eclipses the substance, but there's definitely substance to this movie. I think it's a little muddy. Again, I think in some places it intends to be clearer than it comes off as. And then there maybe more than substance, maybe it's just a flavor or a tone that I think it's challenging to watch. Like if somebody composed an opera that was 3 hours of people kind of screaming as though they were in pain, that would be difficult to listen to. Mm-hmm. Maybe it could still be a masterpiece, but I found this one, so bleak that I don't know. I certainly wouldn't want to sit through it anytime again soon.
No, I wouldn't either. But in terms of, talking about things like The Gray Man, and we mentioned Doctor Strange that, we've talked about a lot over various episodes, but this is a guy who's worked in Hollywood since the 70s primarily as a visual effects artist, but he's obviously incredibly creative.
Yeah.
And you would like to see this kind of creativity in more sci-fi and horror. The first person that I would say would come to mind that is doing anything similar, but in a much more audience accessible way is Guillermo del Toro.
Yes.
He's able to do some pretty weird stuff, but have a strong narrative and storyline and things that you as a viewer can identify with.
Yes.
But
No,
again,
I
think it would be really cool for Phil Tippett to, again, maybe he doesn't want to. Maybe this was his thing that he wanted to direct, and it was his passion project, and maybe he won't ever direct anything again. But to work on, something where he is doing all the design, maybe with somebody else's story.
Yeah.
I would love to see that.
And collaborations like that often bear surprising fruit that sometimes both collaborators are surprised to discover as they go. And I think audiences feel and see that. They think, wow, that felt fresh even to the filmmaker somehow. I don't know.
Yeah.
Otherwise.
Or even something like Tim Burton has done some things like The Nightmare Before Christmas is looked at as a Tim Burton movie, but he was the producer on that.
Right.
So maybe him and Tim Burton get hooked up, and do something. That would be really cool.
Sure. As a resume, as a calling card, this is incredible.
Yeah, that's another thing that I was going to say. It feels in a way like you could just cut this into sections, and this would be just an incredible demo reel for somebody,
oh my God,
looking to. But this is a guy who's been working for almost 50 years in Hollywood.
Yeah, but even so, like Harryhausen, a lot of people do stop animation, but there are artists that there's just so much personality in the is it time intensive? Yes, of course it is. Is it detail intensive? Yes, absolutely. But Tippett here and Harryhausen before him, there's just so much individuality and character that comes through this inanimate work. The process of animating it, they come to life in such unique and memorable, like Clash of the Titans. I
thought about Clash of the Titans a lot,
so unforgettable, and and the animation in this is too. Yeah, it's the stuff of nightmares. It's just not
people who have watched the original. The original Clash of the Titans was one of those things that we kind of grew up with because it was on, played over and over on HBO when we were kids, and I bet I might have watched it 20 or 30 times, right?
Yeah.
Back, and that's one we should do on the show because I haven't seen that in a long time.
I can't believe we haven't done that.
No.
Oh man, that's a classic.
We have not done Clash of the Titans, but it's been a long time since I've seen that. But people who, if you're into Clash of the Titans and that other Harryhausen stuff, he did what is it, the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad or something like that?
Yes. There's a statue of Kali that comes to life, and Sinbad has a sword fight with this statue of Kali that I remember like it's burned into my brain as a kid. I was just pressing my nose up against the screen of the TV. That was so cool.
So, people who are into that, you definitely have to watch this, for just to see the craftsmanship in this.
Yes.
I don't really know what else to say because there's not, it's not like we can talk about the storyline because there's not much storyline.
There isn't. It's almost like a Hieronymus Bosch painting. It's like
that's a good analogy.
Visit this quadrant, and then we follow a character as it walks into that quadrant. And over here is the mad scientist. And there is a kind of a bigger statement being made that seemed to me to be like, oh, who's this nightmarish, sort of looks like a medieval plague doctor, but also reads as death, that takes this screaming baby worm, and they crush it alive, and then it makes this sort of goo that they turn into powder through a process, and then they use that powder and blow it into a forge, and it sort of creates an entire new universe and planets and solar systems, and then seeds the planets with life. And you think, oh, well, maybe it's a comment on, and there's a nurse that kind of carries the baby to him and then can't sleep, and you're sort of like, maybe our world is one in which we do horrible things that trouble us, but it's in the name of progress. But maybe that just all leads back to the Tower of Babel, and we're all doomed to die anyway, because we live in a universe that was created by mad God, and
Yeah.
if that's the mess, but it ends on the last man looking down. There's like 8 endings that you think it's the end, and then finally it sort of ends on this eye that we see rolling around a lot, and you're like, well, wait, is that the eye of the last man? Is that the eye of the mad scientist? Is that the eye of the death figure? Is that supposed to be the filmmaker's eye?
Yeah.
I don't. Is that just humanity like wildly looking around to try and find a way out? I don't know, man, but it's heavy.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, would I recommend it? Having said all of that, I do. I think visually this is an absolute masterpiece. And if you have any interest in stop motion animation and you understand that it's kind of gory and a nightmare world, then I think you must see this film. I think if you're saying, well, hey, is this a good one to watch on date night with a bowl of popcorn? I'm like, well, if you both are that type of person, okay. But otherwise, I didn't find it entertaining in that way. Like as a movie, not every movie needs to make me feel happy, but this was just such a punch in the gut. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that I don't know. I might look for something else.
Yeah, I would, my thoughts are going to echo, everything that you've said. I just visually, if you think this is, you've listened to this and this sounds like, or you've seen the trailer or whatever and think, oh, that looks,
watch the trailer.
That looks impressive.
That's a taste.
Yeah. You're into that kind of thing, then you're, again, I would be curious to hear from people who say, oh, I really enjoyed that in the way that you're talking about.
Sure. Hey,
because it is upsetting and depressing and bleak and grim and all of those things that we've said. But it's just going to be unlike anything that you've seen before.
Right. But hey, there are many different flavors. Let's just talk about horror here for a minute. Many, many, many different flavors in the horror genre, right? I mean, there's the sort of torture, thing where there isn't a happy ending. It's just a movie about which some predatory people capture some prey people and delight in murdering them in excruciating ways. And that's the movie. And it's a popular subgenre of horror. So, that's not my thing. I don't happen to enjoy that, but there's a lot of people that do. And then there's other, there's things that are spooky, but not really scary or gross. And there's things that are like, the caller is in the building, and then there's the campy stuff like Friday the 13th. There's all different, so it takes all kinds. I think might have an audience that just absolutely love the bleakness of it.
Yeah. I this would probably be something I could see I probably would have been, again, I don't think, I wasn't that, you know, as a kid, like that into super dark stuff, but this would be a little bit like a teenager, um, at least when we were teenagers, to watch this, because it's kind of disturbing, and just that dark, I kept making me think of is that one Tool video,
Yeah.
the one that it feels like that in
Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
So I think people that are into that kind of thing, would really be into this.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if that's what you're into, you got to see this movie.
And if, for people who have Shudder already, it's a Shudder exclusive. I don't know if you can watch it anywhere else. I don't know if it's possible to rent it,
I don't think it
on
is
Amazon or anything like that.
right now. I don't think it is yet, but I'm sure that at some point you'll be able to rent it or whatever once they're trying to get drive subscriptions, I think. Now, excuse me. So what are we going to do? Oh, Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com. That is our handle. We are on the socials. We're on all your favorite podcast apps. We're on YouTube if you like to watch us talk in addition to listening to us talk. Please like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment. Tell us that you thought our thoughts were great. Tell us what we missed. Be nice. Don't be a jerk. And if you have suggestions of other stuff we might like, let us know that too. I know you had one that you wanted to do next time that I'm seeing that you sent me a link to. Are we going to do the Perfect Blue?
Sure. Yeah. Did you watch the trailer already?
No, I haven't watched the
Okay.
trailer, but I've heard of Perfect Blue.
Yeah. It's an anime, but it's kind of like psychological thriller. It came up because it's something, and we certainly don't have to watch exclusively stuff that's on Shudder, but they just added it on Shudder. It was I want to say, I don't remember the exact, I think it's like early 2000s was when it was made. So yeah, if you're down for that,
cool. Yeah, sure.
It popped up on there and I was like, oh, I would like to watch that again.
That's a nice. We'll watch a Perfect Blue for next time. So if you're already a Shudder subscriber, you can find it on Shudder, or I'm sure you can find Perfect
you can
Blue in other places.
Yeah, you can get it. It's one of those that's kind of viewed as one of those classics of anime. It's very different, but alongside Akira and Ghost in the Shell, and these are kind of, and I'm sure people who are really into anime would probably say, oh, those are the ones that are for the normies or whatever, but
sure.
It's one of those that's regarded as one of the great anime films. I'm certainly not an expert on anime.
I've not seen it, so I'm looking forward to seeing it. Anime is something that I appreciate as a casual novice.
I'm in the same boat.
I'm really not in the thick of it, but.
And with this, with Mad God, back to our contacting on the socials and all that kind of stuff, I would love to hear from people who have watched this and were really into it, and maybe really determined what this was supposed to be about, other than just life is cruel.
Right. Yeah, I would love to know.
Yeah.
Well, what did I miss? Cool. Then unless you have so I watched the watched the first episode of The Rings of Power, and we had mentioned one episode that we had read two conflicting reviews, one of which thought it was sort of kind of got, there are many ways in which a lavish prequel thing like this can go wrong, and this one kind of goes wrong in every single one of those ways. And then the other one that sort of posited that this was absolutely hands down the greatest cinematic adaptation of the genre to date, and it was incredibly fawning. And
you had to wonder if that one was a plant. I mean,
It
And
felt
not to, I haven't watched this, so I don't want to.
yeah.
I don't really want to comment on whether it's any good or not. But it's like when somebody says that, I don't
The
know.
positive review was so superlative that you're kind of like, can anything be that good? Like literally the best of everything. And
I
just
always feel like things need a bit of, when people are like, oh, Mad God came out 2 months ago and it's my favorite movie of all time. You know what I
right.
mean? I always feel like you need a bit of time to rate something as the best ever. Or, are you
Right.
going to feel that way in 5 years or 20 years?
I would say about it, my take is that I agree more with the former, that one of the things that the original Lord of the Rings did so well was that Peter Jackson took so much loving care in the adaptation of the original books to the screen that in the watching of it, you have what on paper is pretty unwieldy dialogue. It's either fantasy speak verbatim from the book, which can be difficult to say when you're wearing a fake beard and a corny, pointy hat and a robe.
Harrison Ford's famous line also from Star Wars when he said, George, you can write this stuff, but you can't say it.
Yeah. And yet those original Lord of the Rings movies, or the other half of that thought, or is that it's a very complex line of plot in the book that they compress down into one sort of line that needs to kind of carry the heart of that entire plot line that you don't see in the movie somehow, or explain something that the book illustrates in a series of scenes. And granted, you've got Ian McKellen and you've got these great actors doing it, and they had years and years and years to shoot it and finish it. But what I notice in this one is it feels like that care and attention was not put into the writing. A lot of the dialogue feels very, very clanky to me and cliche, and all of the things that makes fantasy, not until very recently, not a super popular genre. It's so incredibly all over earnest and dewy eyed, and I just, while the sets and the cinematography and everything aspire to this sweeping grandeur, even that starts to feel repetitive. Like there are these sort of helicopter shots that at first you're like, well, now that's breathtaking, but by the 20th one you're kind of like, okay, you know what I mean? Like breathtaking alone gets boring over. You can't spackle over the fact that the scene before was stilted and the scene after is stilted, and in between you have this sweeping helicopter shot. Like the helicopter shot doesn't do anything other than establish, now we're in this other gorgeous vista, right? So I found it disappointing, and I honestly don't think I'm going to watch another episode of it. I literally fell asleep.
Wow.
Yeah.
We've talked about that before, but and I don't know that we, ever really came up with what we think is a definitive answer, but it's just always incredible to me with all the money in these productions that so often in these big budget fantasy or sci-fi or action things, that the writing is the weak link in them. There are great writers in Hollywood. There are people who can write great dialogue, but why can you not have a sci-fi or fantasy film with, not that it would be the same, but the same quality of dialogue as like a Coen Brothers film or a Quentin Tarantino film, or Breaking Bad or something like that. I mean, it's like, why do they? Obviously, the powers that be have determined that in their minds, what audiences care about least is the writing, in terms of dialogue.
Maybe audiences don't, you know, maybe
Maybe they don't care.
Maybe there's a big audience of people that just likes elf stuff. And if it looks good enough, then I mean, this is not, I'm often overly harsh. It's not a dumpster fire. It's just they clearly spent a lot of money on it. And I feel like if they'd have just spent a little more money or taken some of that money away from, you know, cut a couple of those helicopter shots and do another couple passes at the script or workshop it a little bit with the actual actors, you know?
Well, that's the thing with and you know, they made a ton of money and won Oscars and all those kind of things. But with the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films, those wouldn't have worked if, you know, you didn't care about those characters. And there's a lot of heart that he was able to inject into that. And as you said, you know, some of that comes from having Elijah Wood and Ian McKellen and you know, these different great actors, but some of that is writing and direction as well. It's not simply the actors.
That's right. And a lot of this feels green screen. Like the Hobbit movies were all shot on green screen. And as an actor who has worked both, I've never actually done a purely green screen movie, but I've been in movies and on stage, and the set that you're acting in does have an effect on you. And you can say, well, you should be able to do it all with your imagination. Maybe so, but you know, if you're on green screen, you both have to be imagining the same thing. And when you're on a physical set, you're both literally standing in the same room. And you can say, well, but the audience doesn't see that. I'm like, I don't agree with you. I think, you know, it creates a feel and a texture. And that's one of the things we love about Denis Villeneuve is he builds these practical sets. Don't have to build those huge cavernous rooms, but he insists on it. And I think the fabric of the film feels different. And that's all the way down through the performance, you know?
Yeah, we talked about Prey a couple of weeks ago, which, you know, was mostly or all filmed on location.
And exteriors.
Yeah.
Right? It's all outside. You're not green screening the woods. You're shooting the woods.
Right.
And so, you know, whether they put in a little CGI mist or something after the fact, you're smelling the earth and the bark and the pine and you're there.
Yeah.
You know,
absolutely.
Anyway, that was
Have you watched anything else, or was Lord of the Rings your or whatever it's
new
called?
season of Rick and Morty?
Oh, I haven't started that yet.
Yeah. Just the first episode. I mean, I love Rick and Morty. I think it's snarky and funny, and it's a very different thing, but I enjoy it.
There was a review that I read a couple of years ago proclaiming Rick and Morty the greatest sci-fi series ever. And I mean, it's amazing, you know. That's what I
like is the writing and how meta it is, and how it loves playing with sci-fi tropes. There was it's not just a sci-fi, but movie tropes and we're getting the gang back together. Rick Sanchez, you son of a bitch, I'm in, you know. And
there's just so much
from a few old friends, and he puts the lollipop in his mouth. And so the heist episode, and they're just so much fun because they're meta layers of meta self-referencing, and now they're in their own multiverse and they're hopping between multiverses, and they're having to keep track of all the different, you know, there's somebody somewhere that's like keeping track of what's canon in that show, and they love to tease that too. And when they're like, hey, that's not what, why would you, in this first episode, there's a lot of things that happen. It's like in space, and the ship says something like, you know, door jammed. And he's like, what? They gave it a voice? Who is this for? We're in space. And it's stuff like that I love. The people who write it are the nerds like us that pick things apart, and then they put that in the script, you know, to call it out.
And as funny as it is, they will work in some really dark and even heartbreaking things that I forget what the one of my favorite episodes was the one where I forget what it's called, but the video game where it's literally you're just living this guy's life from the beginning until he dies at the end.
That's the game.
And what was it? He was like a rug salesman or something. And he just like dies of a heart attack.
I don't remember, but it's like nothing game normal happens. It's just a pedestrian life.
Yeah. That's just brilliant.
Yeah.
So
all right. Well, let's wrap this up.
All right.
Next time we're gonna do Perfect Blue. We already said all this. You've been listening.
Yeah.
So unless you have anything else to add.
No, I think that's it.
We will talk to you next week.